So yeah, basically I was pretty young actually. I was in school when I started having symptoms, although never spoke about it. I was about 16 when I started having real gut problems, and I was super embarrassed. I was at school. I was like, I'm never going to speak about this to anyone. I started to get super sick where I was bedbound when I turned 17, 18. I actually was first diagnosed with celiac disease. I was diagnosed with celiac before I was diagnosed with Crohn's. They failed to diagnose me with celiac disease. So it was actually my mum who asked them to test me um, for celiac disease. And my mum is not in the medical world or anything like that, but thank God she, yeah, asked them to do so because it enabled me to eat appropriately for my condition. And back then, there was no gluten free stuff. Like, gluten free just didn't exist. So it was hard to come to terms with that at such a young age. So my symptoms got a little bit better, but didn't heal completely. I just kind of had waves of ups and downs. And then it got to a point where I had a corporate job. I got my first corporate job when I was 17, 18, and things were getting quite stressful. It was a performance-based job in sales, so the pressure was on. I was training hard at the gym at this point, started bodybuilding when I was 16, so I was, yeah, trying to smash it in the gym every day. I had 2 horses. I was competing on them every weekend. Like, life was hectic. And my firm moved me out to Miami. I was just constantly ill and nothing was helping. Nothing was getting better. My symptoms would like smack me in the face and I would be like
Mm.
crying under my desk. And that went on for a while. I moved back to the UK when I was 21, and I'd basically been living with Crohn's unmedicated for that period of time. So once I received the diagnosis through an MRI of my small bowel, at that point I had 3 stitches. I was like doubled over every day. It was, yeah, it was rough. So I got admitted into hospital and put on intravenous steroids. They told me I had gallstones. I had to have my gallbladder out. I refused, thank God. They told me
Mm.
I had pancreatitis. I didn't. I had Crohn's. So, yeah, I was just getting like misdiagnosed left, right, and center um, until they picked up on the strictures and the Crohn's disease through the MRI. So, they didn't pick it up through any endoscopies, any double balloon endoscopies, anything like that. And then it was a case of just being put on steroids for years, which led to liver failure, kidney failure. So yeah, it was rough. I felt like I'd kind of just completely abused my body through medication when I never wanted it to be that way. Yeah, I started to study in nutrition because I already had the love for it through the bodybuilding, and I was competing in bodybuilding, which wasn't helping either.
Let's talk about the steroids a little bit before you move on.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious to hear because for me, it was kind of like this thing that they're like, oh, you got to get on these medications. And they never really made me feel good. They just dampened things, brought the inflammation down so that I could function a little better in my day. But they never really made me feel like myself or like I was healing. It was just this thing that brought the inflammation down to a level where I could manage in my day.
It's so interesting you say that because I didn't feel any different being on
Mhm.
them at all. I was still every single day, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, I was still getting smacked in the face with like doubled over abdominal pain. And they just were not even touching the surface. And all these other drugs that they were telling me to take as well, which naively you do until they don't work, and then they say continue to take them. Well, why would I do that? Why would I
Mhm.
continue to take something that wasn't helping in any way, shape, or form? And then it comes back around to, well, you need to look at your lifestyle and you need to change your lifestyle. But where do you start with that? It's a lot when you're trying to keep on top of life in general, and then you're having this extra layer of information shoved in your face that you don't know what that looks like. It's just adding to the stress levels, which are then adding to the symptoms. And it's almost like a bit of a vicious circle because you're never baselining. You're always just redlining constantly
Yeah.
because you don't know where your baseline is at that point. You're just existing. You're not even living at that point.
Yeah. When every bite of food creates stress because you don't know how your body is going to react. It's like that borderline level of stress that is existing in your life from day to day is so high. And then
Mm.
someone comes in and says, well, you need to manage your stress levels. And you're like, what does that mean?
Yeah. Even going out with your friends, it's like you're just horrendously uncomfortable the whole time, but you have to put on a brave face. And you don't want to be that person who's like, oh guys, look, I will come, but I feel ill, like if I need to leave. What, like, you don't even want to identify with that. I didn't anyway. So I just used to like bear it and just kind of go along with things when ultimately I was in absolute pain, like trying to enjoy a girl's day out or night out and just thinking like all I want to do is just curl up in a ball and be at
Yeah.
home. So and then that also adds like a level of depression to everything.
Yeah.
And it just feels like you're getting swamped by emotions and physical symptoms. When you don't know how to heal, it's really hard to pick yourself up and draw yourself out of that hole.
Yeah. And how long did you do the medications, steroids before you started to find something else?
It was about 11 years. I was on steroids for a long time. And then I was on biologics for 6 years. But I would still flare up on biologics and then they'd put me on steroids again. So it was almost like it got to a point where my GI said, you've run out of options. You have to have a bag fitted. And I
Yeah.
remember walking out of that consultation and just absolutely bawling my eyes out because I know a lot of people that have stoma bags, it gives them a new lease of life. But I never wanted to let it get that far. And coming from like a health background of being healthy and wanting to train, and it wasn't running the way my life just wasn't running in the trajectory I wanted it to.
Mhm.
So that in itself was really hard to come to terms with and accept. Like accepting the diagnosis was one thing, and then accepting this decrease, this just constant decline in health, um, and also experiencing all the side effects as well. What comes with the medication was hard.
Right. Yeah. Because they are not without their side effects for sure. And it's almost like that was where I got to the point where the side effects started to outweigh the improvement. Because, like I said, I never really felt better. It felt like they were just kind of taking the inflammation down a little bit. And I would try to wean off of them. And then as soon as I would decrease the dose, the inflammation would come back again. And then I remember after about 2 years of doing that, getting to that point where all of the side effects that were happening started to become worse. And I was questioning, like, why am I even taking these?
Yeah,
Like, I
yeah,
feel like I'm going backwards.
yeah. Why am I signing this waiver before I start this new medication? Like, what am I actually doing with my life? And it's not until you zoom out and just take a whole new perspective on everything. It's like the most horrifically uncomfortable situation to go through because you literally have to change your life, the way that you've lived it for however many years, and almost relearn how to live.
Yeah. And that's the biggest difference between the type of approach that we start off with. The medication approach is just targeting the inflammation. And when we start to learn more and ask more questions and educate ourselves in different approaches, we start to ask the question, okay, if this inflammation is causing all the problems, what's causing the inflammation? And then that's when the shift happens, like you said, because then now we're looking at the inflammation as a symptom. It's not the problem. And
Mhm,
it's addressing the environment
mhm,
that created the inflammation
mhm,
that really, it's a whole paradigm shift. This journey for me has completely changed the way I look at health and
mhm.
the way our bodies function and the way that, like I said, that reactionary form of medicine where we just wait until people get sick and then we treat the illness with a medication. It's turning that completely on its head and realizing that we have it
Yeah,
backwards. The only
yeah,
way to truly make a difference is by continuing to ask why and back up and ask why the symptoms are happening in the first place.
and almost like reverse engineering it, but instead of having to go through that whole process, actually living for disease prevention is just so much better, because then you don't have to go through any of this at
Yeah.
any point. And I think it's a real sticking point when it comes to like people investing in their actual well-being, because I mean, we don't even want to go to the dentist, right? And it's like people only see value in their health when it gets bad and there's a problem. But it's like, what are you doing in your day to day that's actually preventing disease and that's actually keeping you healthy? And they're not huge things, but all the little things add up into the big picture, and that big picture is essentially how long you're going to live for. So
Um,
I think it's just a massive underrated area that's not spoken about enough.
Yeah, but I feel like the tables are starting to turn. I feel like there's a shift happening. I feel like people are rejecting that form of reactionary medicine. If we look at our situations 10, 15 years ago, this was kind of all we were given. This was our
Yeah,
only option. This was all we
yeah,
had. But now there's more information out there and people are starting to understand that they have a choice. And I think a lot of people are starting to reject that and saying, like,
yeah,
no, I don't want something that is
yeah,
just going to artificially manage these symptoms. I want
yeah,
something that is going to address the root cause of this issue. And
yeah,
people are starting to push for more.
yeah,
And, in my situation, I'm so glad that I went and sought out a second opinion. And it was actually my mom that pushed me to go and consult with a naturopathic doctor. And she basically said, like, what do you have to lose? You spend a couple $100, and if it doesn't help, oh well,
yeah,
but you can't keep going the way you're going. You need to look for answers. And that decision ultimately changed my life.
yeah. And I love that quote, you're only one decision away from changing your life forever. And it's so true.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
the more people that speak about this and create the awareness around it, I think hopefully there'll be a massive movement and a shift in healthcare in general, because our bodies are designed to heal themselves.
Your body is designed to heal itself. I was afraid to say that because even though that was my experience, it was so far from the, regular script. It was such a departure from that I was afraid to say that out loud because I thought people would think I was a witch or something.
Oh,
Like, you can't say that.
if only.
And so I love that the conversation that this is happening now, that we're able to say that with like personal conviction because of what we've gone through. I'm curious about what your turning point was when you started. Was there a moment for you when you shifted the way you looked at your illness? Was there someone that came into your life or something that you learned that caused you to change the way you were living and really start making some changes?
I think it was just the general consensus of suffering from horrendous side effects from the biologic. Um, Things like extreme hair loss, and I'd pass out a lot of the time because my blood pressure's low anyway, but the biologic would just make it go crazy low. And I just got to a point after 6 years of thinking I was still having flare ups. and almost comparing it and being like, having the perspective actually on what have I got to lose at this point? I have all the tools that I need in my toolbox to know what to do to actually give my body the space that it needs to heal and take myself on this path. But I think, and this falls under a lot of people as well, is having the confidence to actually execute, because we're almost kind of fear-mongered into being on medication and thinking, well, if I'm not on medication, then I'm going to die. And it's,
Mhm.
it's just having that backing of yourself to say, no, this is not working for me. I need to do something different. Because how many
Yeah.
years are you really going to go through? Like, was I going to go through another 6 years of being on the last biologic that was possible to have pretty much like no positive outcomes, but have the potential and high risk of getting cancer, because that was one of the side effects, along with like 20 other pages of side effects. Like, I just didn't want to, I didn't want to put myself through that anymore. I was sitting in that hospital chair, getting that infusion pumped into me every 6 to 8 weeks and just resenting it and genuinely like hating myself for accepting this medication. And I'd watch it come down the tube and just think, no, I don't want that in my body. I just don't want that in my body. And it took a while to come to terms with how I was feeling, but thank God that I made the decision to come off of it and help myself the way that I wish I had done, you know, 10 years ago. But I didn't have the knowledge that I have now. So again, I'm not going to blame anyone. I'm not going to have victim mentality. Putting that responsibility into my own hands and not
Yes.
being able to like almost like rely on someone else to heal my body for me, I
Yeah.
suppose, in a way.
Because we do that. We are conditioned to outsource our health, the responsibility of our health to someone
Yeah.
else. We don't want to hold fully the responsibility of our health.
Yeah. And I think it scares the living daylights out of people. And upon reflection, it was probably one of the main things that held me back. That doesn't make you a bad person or a coward or anything like that. It's literally just the way that you've been brought up and
Yeah.
conditioned. So undoing that, it takes work. But yeah, it is possible, and we're both living proof of that.